Good evening, and welcome to East and West Learning Connections. I'm Yang Wang, the president of the organization. Tonight, we are very happy to be joined by Martin Copeland, a successful entrepreneur and a startup mentor. Martin came to our organization last year and delivered wonderful stories. So tonight he's coming back again and will share his stories and also talk about some personal and business barriers to success. Martin was the managing director of the managing director of Content Management Corporation with offices across North America. And in 2011, his company was acquired by Multiview, a B2B marketing agency that generates more than $100 million sales a year. And he stayed there for another 2 years as a senior vice president for Multiview, and before he got retired. And back home, he was an award-winning member of the Canadian Society of Association Executives, and he also served on the board as past chair and president for several nonprofit organizations, such as the International Society of Communication Specialists and Tourism Toronto. And now he is retired, and he gives back a lot to the community by mentoring startup companies, also by volunteering for several charities, such as Trailblazers, Tandem Cycling Club, and Toronto Ski Hawks for the blind people, and other charities. And every year, he would do rides to raise money for the blind community, for medical research, children's center, so on and so forth. A great man with great success. Thank you so much, Martin. And he is a successful father of 3 successful children and the grandfather of 2 little ones. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with our audience. Again, welcome, Martin.
Well, Young, thank you very much for that overly kind introduction. I can't imagine myself ever actually meeting all the criteria for that introduction, but it's always lovely to hear, and it's only I'm only able to do these things when there's people like you around that allows for the help and allows me to engage in these various organizations where I am able to give back after taking much more than I'm able to give. So thank you very much for the introduction. What I planned to do this evening was to talk about being a successful entrepreneur. Having said that, I don't want anyone to despair and think about, well, I don't want to be an entrepreneur, but I'd like to be successful. Most of the ingredients that I talk about tonight about being a successful entrepreneur pertain very much to being successful personally as well. So I think even if you're not planning on being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of the discussion that we'll have tonight that will help you both personally and professionally. So I hope you'll stay tuned. And my plan is to try and get through some of the ingredients that create success. And at the same time, hopefully do that in less than an hour and leave time, approximately half an hour at the end for any questions, comments, and discussion. So to dive in right away, and let me start by saying this, that success means different things to different people. And success isn't necessarily about, a financial success. So a lot of people have a lot of wealth that I consider to be very unsuccessful. And there's lots of people with no wealth that I consider to be very successful. So success just means different things to different people. But tonight, a lot of what we'll talk about is achieving financial success. But we'll also talk about the importance of just being successful with or without finance. So If I may for a moment tell you a little bit about my background and my story, because Young knows I like to tell stories. So I may as well start off with my best story, because it's the one I know best, and that's about my career and where I started, and a little bit about how I got engaged with my company, and right up to the time when I retired 38 years later. Firstly, I was in the same business basically for 38 years. I started when I was 19 years old. I started a company, actually first started a company called Audio Archives, which then transitioned into Content Management Corporation and was eventually bought by Multiview. When I began my business at 19 years old, the reason I began my business is I had somewhat of a traumatic event happen to me when I was 19 years old, in that my oldest brother, his name was Vern, and he was 26 years old. And on the evening of my 19th birthday, Vern passed away of cancer. And it had quite an effect on me. I was the youngest of three boys. He was the oldest. Obviously, it was tremendous trauma for our family. I was in first year university at the University of Toronto. It immediately put me into a bit of a lost situation where I was really grappling with a whole lot of things going on at that time. And in the spring of that year, my father was invited as a guest speaker. He was in the chemical specialty manufacturing business. He was invited as a speaker in Chicago to be the keynote speaker at their conference. And he went down there, and there's a company there called Audio Archives that recorded him and immediately gave a copy of his presentation to him on audio cassette. Well, he immediately came home and handed me the cassette and said, "This is a business that I think you might be interested in," because he knew that I had lost my passion for education at that point, and I just really wanted to get into business. And he knew that, unlike my other two brothers who were quite successful in school, he knew I wanted to go into business. So he handed me the cassette, and a long story short, from there, I actually flew down to Chicago, met with the owner of Audio Archives, tremendous individual who mentored me and helped me along with my father into creating Audio Archives Canada. And I began the business almost a month later, and the rest was basically history. I survived up here about 10 years. Audio Archives in Chicago decided to go into another business and gave me the rights to the US. I then opened up in the US. We became the #1 North American publishing company in the audio and video field. I went on in 1995 to become partners, take on a partner. We converted the company to Content Management Corporation. Of course, by the year 2000, we took everything online. We added testing to our audio and video publishing that we did online. And we then sold the company in 2011 to a publishing company who was owned by a private equity company called Warburg Pincus out of New York. And we retired in 2013. And then I went on to mentor these startup companies, or these early stage companies, from 2013 on, as well as being involved with some charities. Audio Archives, the company itself, what it did was we worked with professional associations. So associations every year have an annual conference, and at their annual conference, they have their best speakers talk to the members of the association. So we came up with the idea of recording those speakers and then going into partnership with that association and selling that education back to the members, either for those who attended the conference that wanted to listen to the sessions again, or alternatively, for those who couldn't attend the conference but would like to still get a copy of the presentations that took place at the conference. So I hope all that makes sense to you. I can tell you that my children, as they went to school, never understood what I did, I think up until university. And I think that all my children's friends figured I must have been a criminal of some kind and doing illicit activity, because my children could never quite explain my business. But nevertheless, it was a very successful business. And we sold out to Multiview and retired. And now I am working with early stage companies. So let me tell you a little bit about what we want to talk about tonight. And I basically boiled it down to this. In essence, as I see it, there are 11 keys to being a successful entrepreneur. And in fact, I think they're the same keys to being a successful person. And we'll go through them tonight. But just before I do, I wanted to just start off with just a few quick thoughts. The first one is that, the first key to success is get started. And it's amazing how simple it sounds, getting started, but it's amazing how many people struggle with just actually taking the first step. It's like a young child, watching them taking the first step and how they struggle to take that first step. And once they take that first step, it's only a question of days before they're running around and you can't catch up them. Having 2 grandchildren, I know what that's all about. So you got to get started. That's the first thing. And one thing that my parents used to say to me, and I would say to you, and again, I think this has as much emphasis in your personal lives as it does your professional life, is that if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And the fact is that becoming an entrepreneur or becoming successful at anything in life is not easy. It requires a lot of blood and sweat and energy, and it requires an immense amount of persistence. Again, it's a difficult thing to do. So anyone who thinks it's going to be easy, your thinking is wrong. So if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. It's not easy. It's difficult. So you've got to buckle up, get ready, and work very hard at it. The other second thing I'd like to say before getting into the 11 elements of what makes a person successful is that every day I practice being grateful and I celebrate what I have, what I've achieved, not what I haven't achieved. I never spend wasted time thinking about what I don't have, what I could have, what other people have, because that's your biggest time waster. Only focus to be grateful for what you have and celebrate it, and you'll have a very happy and successful life. Now, the name of this presentation tonight, some of you might be wondering, it says, "Success is only an elephant away." So here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is I'm going to explain to you what that means when that success is only an elephant away. But the bad news is you're going to have to wait until I'm about halfway through the presentation. So stay tuned and I will explain to you why I've chosen this title tonight. So to begin, the 11 or 12 steps of being successful, the overview of the 11 or 12 steps are as follows. You must believe in yourself. You've got to think independently, be persuasive, take risks, focus, work hard, have the will to succeed, create barriers to competition, build a network, be internally driven, and ask for help. That's the 12th thing that I didn't include in the 11. There are actually 12 items. So let's go over these individually rather than collectively. Let's start at the beginning. The first thing is to have a self-belief. That's number one. And in order to have a self-belief, you've got to have a mission, a vision, and a roadmap. What do I mean by a mission? A mission is, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? If you don't know what you want to do, anything will do. So the first thing is, what is it you want to do? So if you're a carpenter, as an example, your mission might be, I want to create the nicest furniture and open a furniture store. That might be your mission statement. Your vision, so your mission is very much about what you want to do right now. Your vision statement is very much about what you want that to look like in 3 to 5 or 10 years from now. So a vision might be, now that you know you want to be a carpenter and you want to make nice furniture, your vision might be, is I want to have a store in every province across Canada. I want to have 10 stores, one in every province. Or it might be 11 provinces now. Who knows? I get confused. Things have changed over the years, the number of territories and provinces. But anyways, want to have a store in every province, or I want to have a store in every major city in Canada. And I want to be able to teach people carpentry so that they can deliver the same quality of product and service at the same reasonable prices that I want to across Canada. So that might be your vision. And then, of course, the final thing is that you need a roadmap. And a roadmap basically means you have to know how you're going to get there. Because if you don't know what road to take, it really doesn't matter which one you take. You can take any road because nothing's going to lead to anywhere. You really have to design a roadmap. It's just like taking a trip to Florida. If you want to go to Florida and you take the highway that takes you to Vancouver, it's going to be a very, very long time before you get to Florida. You have to plan that road out, plan, that you're going to take, whether it's, I-95 or I-75, whatever it might be. You've got to know what road you're going to take and how you're going to get there. The most successful people that I know believe in themselves almost to the point of delusion, okay? And this sets you up to be what we call a disruptor. If you look at someone, go way back in time, like 100, 120 years ago, back then, there were no airplanes in the sky. But along came individuals and said, you know what? We're going to take this aluminum tube that weighs tens of thousands of pounds, and we're going to make it fly in the sky. Well, had you said that 120 years ago in society, they would have locked you up. They would have put you in jail. They would have said, you're delusional. You can't do that. I mean, take this heavy object and make it fly. But you have to almost be delusional about what you want to be, what you want to do, and what you want to become. And in order to do that, it takes you to the point of becoming a disruptor. Just like when Elon Musk came along and said, okay, we're going to take this electric car. We're going to put a bunch of batteries in our car, replace all the traditional gas carburetor things, and we're going to make this car run entirely on battery. And not only that, we're going to make it, we're going to make it run itself. We're going to make it, so that it self-runs. And nobody has to steer it. It'll be full self-driving. Well, back then, he became a huge disruptor to the automobile industry. And he was living, a lot of people said, when he first said, look, I'm going to take and make these battery cars and they're going to replace gas cars. They said, Elon, you're delusional. You can't do that. But he believed so much in himself, he became so delusional that he was able to do that. So in order to be a disruptor, you have to be a bit delusional, and you really have to believe in what you're doing, that self-belief. The other interesting thing that I found in life, and this is an odd one too, is everyone is somewhat familiar with the fear of failure. I think everyone could say, yeah, we know what fear of failure is. We're always afraid to fail, right? But what's very interesting, and what I've discovered in my life, is there's an equal and opposite fear, and it's called the fear of success. You see, as young individuals, when we're born and raised, we're already conditioned to a certain level of success. If we grew up middle class, we're pretty comfortable with living in a smaller home, a car on the driveway, food on the table, roof over our head. We're pretty comfortable with that. But take that same person and put them in a home that's 15,000 square feet with 22 bedrooms. There's a real discomfort about that. And that's called the fear of success. So the fear of success can often keep us from succeeding simply because we do have that fear. And it's the same fear that we have, which is the fear of failure. That same person, if all of a sudden ends up not being able to feed themselves and is out there, unfortunately, having to go to a food bank, is going to fight very, very, very hard to get back to being that middle-class person. So we have a fear of failure, but we also have a fear of success. And that's also one of the barriers we need to break through in order to be successful. The other part of what I want to tell you about self-belief is that we need to operate with no fear. And this has to do whether it's professionally, opening your own business, or just every day in life. The number one thing that you need to do is operate with no fear. And no fear means not being afraid to failure, because failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is part of success. And when I teach people in a slightly different atmosphere than I'm teaching, this evening on Zoom, this is more in person and it's to a different group. I often say to them, don't focus on the failure, don't focus on the success. Only focus on the failure, because I'll often say to them, look, how many people do you have to call to make a sale? And often they'll come back to me and they'll say, I have to call 20 people to get my sale. And I said, okay, so when you call 100 people, you end up getting 5 sales. They say, that's correct. So I tell them, rather than focusing on the 5 successes, focus on the 100 failures. Go out there today and try and get 20 failures, because you know one thing. If on that 21st person, you're going to get a sale. So don't worry about the success will look after itself. Go out there and find 19 people that will tell you no, so you can find the one person that will tell you yes. It's a very different way of thinking than going out there and getting very frustrated because everyone's saying no to you. I'm telling you, go out there and find the no's and then be pleasantly surprised when you find a yes. Okay. So the bottom line is you cannot be afraid of failure because you won't get very far. And remember that there is this fear of success and failure, and it's a barrier that you need to break through. The other few quick things on self-belief or self-practice is also you must operate with no anger. Anger is just something that gets in the way for everybody. You can't be angry at anybody at any time. The only person that wins when you're angry is the other person. Don't be angry. Get over it. Forgive, forget, move on. Okay. And when you get into sales and there's a whole emotional aspect of thing, and you get 5 no's and 6 no's and 7 no's, even if you're single and you're trying to date and 7 people tell you no, sometimes you start to get angry. You get mad at the world. Don't get angry. Okay. Just move on to number 8, 9, and 10. Control the emotions. Another thing I want to share with you tonight is don't worry. Everybody's biggest nemesis, I think, is worrying. You can't worry. And here's the other thing that I tell you, as I tell my children every single day of the week. 99.9% of what you worry about never happens. Okay. You all know that. We all know that. What do? You're going to get off this call tonight and start worrying about what you have to do tomorrow. Stop worrying. It does nothing. The other thing I'll tell you about worry is that what you worry about is never, ever as bad as what you think it's going to be, and it's never as good as what you think it's going to be. It's always somewhere in the middle, and it always works out. Works out because it has to work out. So get rid of worry in your life. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your emotion. It's bad for your success. Get rid of it. It's not worry, and just understand that the likelihood of it happening is less than 1%. So it's not worth spending any time on. The final subject under sort of this self-discipline is you also have to learn how to operate with no guilt. And I know a few of you are probably laughing and smiling right now when I say this, because we all grew up with nothing but guilt from our parents, guilt from our teachers, guilt from our mentors, guilt from whoever it might be. But we learned guilt at a very young age. And of course, now we've become experts at it. We now guilt other people into everything that we can. So you can't operate with guilt. You have to operate with a clear head, understanding that no one should ever make you feel guilty. So that's enough about self-belief and a little bit about self-discipline. Let's turn to number 2 and talk about learning to think independently. Entrepreneurship is a very difficult thing to teach because original thinking is very difficult to teach. You can't learn this in school. And as much education as you have, and you can be the most educated person in the world, it's really, really difficult to teach people to think independently. The other thing about thinking independently is learning the art of listening, because that I know of, unless you can prove me wrong, you can't learn while you're talking. Tonight, I'm not going to learn anything until we get to the discussion part, when I have an opportunity to listen. Right now, you have roughly an hour to learn something because you're going to listen. So when you're conversing with somebody, particularly someone you have a lot of respect for, someone who's giving your time, someone who is educated, someone who can help you, spend most of your time listening to them. Don't interrupt them. Let them talk so that you can learn. Okay. But one of the most important things to create original thinking is to be very clear is this independent kind of way of thinking. And again, it's not something you learn in school. It's just something you have to discipline and learn yourself, to just think independently and not worry about what everybody else thinks. Just worry about what you think. Number three is important, and it's under the category of getting very, very good at sales. Self-belief alone is not sufficient. You need to be able to convince other people of what you believe. In other words, it's the art of persuasion. And that doesn't matter whether you want to be an entrepreneur or whether you want to be get tickets for a concert, or you want to convince your children that they should take out the garbage. It's called the art of persuasion. And this could lead me down into about another half-hour conversation about how you use persuasion, because I'm saying, be persuasive, but I'm not explaining how, which I won't tonight unless it comes up in the questions. But there is an art and a science to it, and there's a real easy way of persuading other people, which I can tell you about if any of you choose to ask me about that in the discussion. But you do have to learn how to convince other people of what you believe in and how to persuade them to buy into what your thinking is and what your product or service is, or what you're offering, whether it be personal or professional. And that I know of, all great careers to some degree become sales jobs. You have to evangelize your plans to customers, to prospective employers, the press, inventors, etc. It requires an inspiring vision, strong communication skills, some degree of charisma, and evidence of the ability to execute. All of this has to be done with integrity. That's absolutely oxygen. You have to operate with integrity. In other words, you need to do what you say you're going to do. You have to create trust. It's not just like sales can't be about lying. And there's too many people that sell and they use tactics that aren't true to sell. And that will come back to haunt you. Not only do you have to be persuasive, but you have to be honest. And then you build trust. And remember one thing about sales, everybody wants what they can't have. So in creating a sale, you have to create action. You have to create urgency. Sometimes that's done by limiting supply. So there's a whole series I do on sales, which again, we won't have time to get into right now, again, unless it comes up on the discussion or we do this another night. But the fact of the matter is you really got to get good at sales if you're going to be successful. And it doesn't matter what you do in life. Everything is still sales, okay? Number 4, and I put this up there with one of the most important of the 12 items, is you need to take risks. Most people overestimate risk and underestimate reward. Taking risks is really important because it's impossible to be right all the time. You just can't be right all the time. So you need to take risks and you need to learn how to fail. You really need to try as many things as you can and then adapt as quickly and learn more. The other part of taking risks is to embrace change. And again, this is another topic I could talk about forever, but embracing change is something that, to share with you my story, is when I was in my business up until the age of about 30 or 35, I was just so happy delivering all of these speeches on audio cassettes and everything was running along well. I was making great money for a young guy. I just wanted everything to stay the same. I didn't want there to be any change. And along came the digital revolution and it freaked me out. And it caused me such fear and such pain and such worry, which I told you, never worry, right? And I was not good at embracing change. But the digital technology and taking on a new partner forced me to embrace change, to accept it. And not only did I embrace change, I learned how to love it. I love it so much today that I can't get enough of it. The next phone comes out, I'm the guy that has the first phone. The next software comes out, I got the next software. Next car comes out, I got the next car. I love technology and I embrace it like crazy. And I'm always trying to be at the leading edge of it. So the person that embraces change and goes with it, it's definitely a part of success. If you're the type of person that gets a computer and it's 5 years old or 6 years old, and you know exactly how to use it, and the last thing you want to do is change it because it means learning new things, that's not a person who embraces change. And it's a really tough thing to do. And if you're in that category, you're probably in the category of 80 or 90% of the people. People hate change, period, end. So you got to be part of that 5 or 10% of people that love change. In order to be successful, you need to embrace change, whether it be technology or any other means. You need to embrace change. It's a really important element of success. It's something you can learn. And I am the best evidence of it, because if there was anybody who hated change most, it was me. And once I learned to love it and embrace it, now I can't get enough of it. Technology, as fast as it's moving, moves too slow for me. Point number 5 is focus. And this is really, really an important lesson that I learned in business. And this took me almost 30 years to learn. And that is, focus on one thing and be the best at it. Continually innovate. I'm not saying don't innovate. You've got to innovate, right? All the time. You've got not only innovate, you've got to revolutionize, right? So there's a difference between revolutionizing and innovating, but you've got to revolutionize, you've got to be disruptor, and you have to continually innovate. If you look at the largest companies in the world, think about this for a moment. When we talk about focus, you look at the largest companies in the world, Apple, Tesla. I would ask the question to you on this phone, how many products does Apple have? And some people might say 5, some people might say 1 or 2, some people say 10, but you won't say 100, you won't say 50. Apple really is about a few products. That's all they have. But they're the absolute best at what they do. And they keep getting better and innovating and trying to make that product. They just keep working at it, getting better, better, better. Look at Tesla. Now it's like the largest automobile company in the world. Well, they actually call themselves an energy company, but it's one of the largest companies in the automotive field in the world, probably the most valued company in the world, that came from nowhere. And you look, they have the least amount of cars. They've got 2, 3 models. Well, now I guess they've got 4 models, I think it is. I guess they've got the S, the X, the Y, and the 3. So I think they've got 4 models. Every other manufacturer, look at Mercedes, they've got like 100 models, right? Tesla has 4 models and they're 10 times the size, right? Because what they did was they focused on one thing and they simply have become the best at it. And it's really important to have focus. Don't try to be everything to everybody. And that's the same thing in life. That's the same with our kids. Don't try and be everything to our children. Be the best, be the best at what you do. Learn how to say no. When someone says to you, when someone goes to Tesla and says, oh, can you make a smaller car, or can you make a motorcycle? Tesla says, no, that's not what we do. This is what we do, right? So you got to learn how to say no. And there's a whole bunch of other things I can go into on focus. I'm going to try and just revert back to just, trying to be as general as possible and leaving this to more to the question period. The other thing is that you have to keep in mind when you talk about focus within your company or in your life, whether you're taking inventory of your assets in a company or you're taking inventory of yourself, your personal self, there's something called the 80-20 rule. And in almost every case, 80% of what you're doing effectively, or I should say 20% of what you're doing effectively accounts for 80% of your success. So let me explain what I'm saying to you. If a company, even like Apple, looked at its sales and it has, let's say, 5 or 6 or 10 products, if you actually asked Apple and said to them, okay, well, that's great, but where does your success come from? Apple could look back at its sales and tell you that 80% of its sales comes from 20% of its products. Probably its iPhone and maybe its MacBook or its iPad, something like that. But 80% of its sales comes from 20% of its product frame, right? 80% of anyone's success comes from 20% of what they're doing. So every now and then you've got to stop, take inventory, and think about getting rid of that 80% that really isn't providing any value to you. In fact, that 80% is providing less than 20% value to you. And that's whether it's a business or it's a personal inventory. Effectively use that 80-20 rule. So even if you walked away tonight and said to yourself, okay, let me look at a project that I'm doing, or let me look at my family, or let me look at my business, all right, and use the 80-20 rule and really try and hone in and say, all right, we're 80% of what I'm benefiting from this business is coming really from 20% of our products. So why do we even carry the other 80%? So it's just a thought for you. We engage the 80-20 rule fairly frequently so that we are always getting rid of things that don't make sense or don't make sense for us to continue carrying as inventory and are of no value to us. Number 6 is fairly simple, but very important. And that is you've got to work hard and smart. And I'm going to use this expression to you. Extreme people get extreme results through perseverance and persistence. I'll repeat that. Extreme people get extreme results through persistence and perseverance. If you don't want to be an extreme person, great. That's no issue. But in most cases, most successful people, and I'm not talking even about financial success, I'm just talking about successful people defined by you. You define your own success. They're extreme. They're extreme people who get extreme results. And whether it's the Dalai Lama or whether it's Florence Nightingale or whether it's the president or the prime minister of a country or whether it's the CEO of a company, okay? It really doesn't matter. These are all extreme people that get extreme results. So one of the things you need to start thinking about is, what does it mean to be an extreme person, and how hard and how smart do I have to work to be that person? If you choose that you want to have a life filled with, a nice life of work and play balance, you work 8 hours, you play 8 hours, that's great. That may be success defined by you. If you choose and say, what's successful to me means working, 12 hours a day and being overly successful, well, then you become an extreme person looking for extreme results. So work hard and work smart. Number 7 is have the will to succeed. Here's an interesting statistic. Most people don't even try. They just accept things the way they are. Almost always, the people who have said to me, the people who I mentor, and they look at me and they say, I'm going to keep going until this works. No matter what the challenges are, no matter how hard this is, no matter how emotionally down I get, no matter how extremely difficult things get, I'm going to figure them out. And if they really, truly mean it, almost every one of those persons goes on to succeed. And again, that's just not necessarily about being an entrepreneur. That's about being everything in life, okay? And I'm going to use an example here, and I'm going to maybe embarrass Young a little bit right here. Young said, okay, I'm visually impaired. But she also said, that doesn't mean I can't cycle. And she went out and she cycles. And not only that, she downhill skis. I bet you there's a ton of people fully sighted that have a complete fear of downhill skiing. Young doesn't have sight, and she goes and downhill skis. Now, if that's not a successful person, I don't know who a successful person is, because that shows me everything about a successful person. She went out there and she says, I'm going to downhill ski. I'm going to use all the abilities I do have. I'm not going to worry about what I don't have. I'm going to use the abilities I do have. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this. And she went out there and she got it done. And I'm so proud of her. And one of the reasons I'm on this call tonight is that I would do anything for her and her family, because she is so driven to success. And starting this East-West dialogue and all the things that she's done in her life, that I'm committed to people like that, because to be successful, I like to be around successful people. And she's certainly, in my eyes, a very successful person. Also, to be willful, you need to be optimistic. Okay. You've heard the expression, the cup is half full, the cup is half empty. When you look at the cup, it's always got to be half full. That's an optimistic person. And quite candidly, I've never met a successful pessimistic person. I've never met someone who's been pessimistic and successful. Every person I know that's successful is optimistic, and I think it's really important. So now I'm going to get to you a couple of stories. And these are the stories I sort of promised at the very beginning, because I told you that the title of this presentation is Success is Only an Elephant Away. So I'm going to share with you my elephant story. It has to do with back when I was recording speakers. As I told you, you know what my business was. I was recording speakers and then helping through the association, helping them sell those speeches from the conventions back to the delegates of the conference and the members of the association. And in doing one of those recordings back, I guess in the early 80s, there was a gentleman who came along and talked about the way an elephant is trained to work in a circus tent. And he explained that when an elephant is very, very young, what they do is they tie this very heavy, thick rope around the elephant's neck. It's very, very thick. And that thick rope is tied to a pole in the middle. And in order for the elephant to move, that thick rope keeps the elephant moving around that pole in a complete perfect circle, and the elephant keeps walking. And what they do is every now and then they reward the elephant with food and water. And as the elephant begins to grow and gets bigger and bigger, of course, they have to thicken the rope, and the rope gets thicker and thicker and thicker until they feel that the elephant has learned that the only way it's going to eat or get water is through walking around that circus tent with the rope that's attached to the pole in the middle. And then eventually what they do is they begin to thin out the rope. They make it thinner and thinner and thinner until it gets down to the point where that rope is probably like maybe a 1/4 inch thick. It's like, it's just a very thin rope, but the elephant has been trained that it has to walk in a circle. It's conditioned to train that it walks in a circle. And in order to eat, in order to get its food and water, it has to continue to walk in that circle. And in the elephant's mind, at this point, when they become a young adult, they know that because they have that little thin rope attached to the pole in the middle, that the only way that it can be successful to walk around and get its food is to walk around that tent. And they do that for the rest of their life in the circus. If that elephant knew the strength that it actually had, with just a slight tug of its trunk, it could rip that rope in half and tear the entire circus tent down if it did. And in the history of all these elephants that have been trained, to the best of this speaker's knowledge, only one elephant ever figured out that it could actually rip that rope and tear the entire circus tent down and do whatever it wanted to do. So the question that I would pose to you tonight would be, do you want to be that one elephant, or do you want to be all just part of the sheep that are herded around, just part of the elephants that are herded around, completely conditioned because you've been trained all of your life that the level of success to the level of success that you can have. So the idea is that we've all been conditioned. Doesn't matter who you are. We've all been conditioned to a certain level of expectation of success. Okay. We've all been conditioned to that. If you want to be that one elephant, break through, you have to be able to use your trunk, break that rope, rip down that circus tent, and know that there's a much bigger picture out there for you to be successful. Just like that one elephant figured out he could rip that tent down and that it wasn't going to constrain him any longer. The other story I'll share with you, we'll move fairly quickly through the balance because we're running out of time here, is a story of another speaker, and it happened to be in the same year. It talked about putting flies in a shoebox. And what this speaker did was he went out and he captured about, I think it was 50 flies, and he was able to capture them with a net and put them inside a shoebox. And then what he did was he poked a bunch of holes, very, very small holes, small enough that the flies couldn't fly out of the shoebox. And he poked a bunch of holes in the shoebox so they could breathe. And he put food and water at the bottom of the shoebox so that they could eat and they could drink. And at the very beginning, when he put the top on the shoebox with the little holes in it, all he could hear was ding, 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 ding. And that was the flies they were all trying to fly out of the shoebox. And all the flies were hitting the top of the shoebox, hitting the top of the shoebox. And as time went along, a half an hour went by, an hour went by, all of a sudden, the banging started getting less and less. Some of the flies had just probably decided that, you know what, they can't get out. There's no way they can get out. So they're just going to walk at the bottom, have their food, have their meal, breathe their air. And that was going to be the extent of their life. And they would just walk around and be very comfortable. And so an hour later, there was a few flies still trying to get out. And then the speaker left the shoebox overnight, came back in the morning, and noticed that there was no bangs on the top of the shoebox, none. Basically, none of the flies were trying to get out. They all had, been conditioned to the fact that they can't get out of the box. So he finally decided to try the final aspect of the experiment, and he lifted the top of the shoebox off just to see what would happen, right? Figuring that once he took the top off the shoebox, all of the 50 flies would just fly out. Now, these flies, keep in mind, had sat there for 24 hours. They've been conditioned that they can't get out. I guess if these flies were like our children, if we gave them video and we gave them TV to watch, they would probably be there for the rest of their lives. But anyways, he took the top of the shoebox off, and again, what happened? All of the flies, with the exception of one, all the flies just stayed at the bottom. They were conditioned; they can't get out. And even though the top was off the box, they had been conditioned. You can't get out. Only one flew away. So I'll say the same thing to you again. Do you want to be that one fly that escapes, that doesn't stop, that has the persistence of wanting to try, will never quit? If you want to be that one fly or that one elephant that won't give in to the conditioning, then that road will lead you to success. So that's my couple of stories for tonight. I'm going to move on to 8 through 12 as quickly as I can so we can get into the discussion part. We've only got about 8 or 9, 10 minutes left of what I'm hoping to be my presentation. So let me get into number 8. Number 8 is to create barriers to competition. And what you want to do in creating barriers to competition is you want to create stickiness and stickiness to entry. And that basically means that you need to go out and create, as an example, personal relationships with other vendors, people who control certain marketplaces. You need to build a strong personal brand. You need to build a subscription business. So once you figure out how to get people to subscribe to what you do, like Apple has a subscription for so much per month, you get a bucket of 6 things that you get. If you get people into a subscription program, it means they're really dedicated to your company. The chances of people canceling subscriptions is very limited. And again, this is a whole other seminar unto itself. There's a whole other session unto itself, which I won't bother to go into tonight. We can turn it into another evening. Also, it means to differentiate or die. You need to differentiate your product in some way, because if it's just like everybody else's, someone else is going to figure out eventually how to make it better for less money. So you need to figure out how to make your product different enough. And you need to execute or be executed. That's a whole other discussion for another night. But you need to execute on your product, differentiate it. And one of the ways you can differentiate it is to put it into a market where nobody else can copy it. It may be putting a patent on it. It may be that the initial outlay of money to get into that particular product or service is so high that somebody would have to have a lot of capital to get into it. There's a bunch of ways you can create barriers to competition, but it's a very important thing to do is to try and eliminate as much competition by creating as much barriers as you can. Number 9, build a network. Building a network means working with great people. Part of working with great people is also helping people as much as you can. You want to really, really be a good person. Be good to the people you work with. Treat them really, really well. And I'm going to make this statement. Be overly generous with your people. Don't be cheap, okay? Don't hold back. Don't try and get out of them what you can. Be overly generous with your people. It will come back to you 10 times over. My parents used to tell me this. Not worry, but they used to say, well, I guess they used the word worry, they didn't mean it, but worry about the giving, the taking will look after itself. Be a giver, okay? Be a giver. Be overly generous to the people that you work with. Be overly generous to all people. Build a huge network, okay? Associate yourself with positive people that you feel are going places, and ask for help if you need it. Number 10, if you want financial success, then you need to own things, okay? You're likely, and good news, bad news, you're likely not going to have crazy amount of financial success from a salary alone. Not that that wouldn't define you as being successful, because that may be your definition of success. But if you want financial success, the fastest and best way to do that is to own things. So what do I mean by own things? It could be a piece of a business, real estate, natural resource, intellectual property, anything along those lines, anything that you can own. The more things you own, the chances are the more chance you have to be financially successful. Number 11, one of my favorites, be internally driven. What does that mean? Most people are primarily externally driven. They do what they do because they want to impress other people. Impress yourself, not other people. So many people I know work to have a Mercedes on their driveway, okay? And why do they have that Mercedes? Not for them. They have that Mercedes because they want to impress their neighbors or their friends. And there's nothing worse that you can do than to be externally driven. And externally driven just means that. It means making impressions on other people. So I go out and buy that really expensive car, and I get no pleasure from it other than the fact I'm trying to prove myself to somebody else. And I go and work my guts out, okay, just to prove that I can own a Mercedes. That's not being successful. Sorry, was there a question there? Oh, no,
sorry, that's background noise.
Oh, okay, just background noise. Okay, so what you need to learn to do is to be internally driven. And that means only worry about impressing yourself. Only impress yourself, because then you can enjoy the fruits of your labor. And if you do want that Mercedes, and if it does make you happy, then go ahead and own it. But don't go out there and be externally driven and do it because you want to impress other people. Number 12, pick up the phone and ask for help. Most people just simply don't pick up the phone. You would be amazed at the stories I hear, story after story after story, of people who sit there and say, hey, I phoned Bill Gates, or I phoned Elon Musk, or, they phoned a pretty big name and they answered the phone. You hear stories like this all the time. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask for help. Just most people simply don't do it. They think the person won't help them. Thing that's interesting about people is most people do want to help other people. 99% of people are happy to help you. You just have to ask. So pick up the phone and ask for help. You'd be absolutely amazed at the type of help that you can get from people by simply asking. So in summary, okay, of the 12 items, we talked earlier about these things. Self-confidence, okay, be creative, be charismatic, be a leader, and be willing to change, okay? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. It's not going to happen. So be willing to change. Be willing to act And most importantly, be willing to fail. Really focus on that. Be willing to fail. And of course, the fifth thing is focus, then commitment, have a burning desire to succeed. I mean, it's got to burn inside you. Those are the only people I know that become successful. Differentiate yourself, set up your competitive edge, be social, extend your network. Financial success, remember, comes with acquisition, own things. You can't have an ego. Check your ego in at your home, throw it away, forget about your ego, forget about your pride. Don't worry about impressing anybody else, just impress yourself. And outreach, go out to other people and ask them for help. So in summary, success is not a one-size-fits-all concept. It means different things to different people, depending on their passions, their interests, their values, and their goals. However, there are some common principles that anyone can use to achieve success in their lives. And these principles are the following. Knowing your desired outcome. We talked about goals before, setting your goals, setting a mission statement, a vision. So knowing your desired outcome and having a very clear vision of what you want to accomplish. Maybe that's, maybe you're single and you want to meet somebody else. Set that up as a mission. Figure out what your goal is, figure out what your mission is, figure out what that vision is going to be like, figure out what that's going to look like in 3 years from now. Knowing what inspires you, finding your purpose, finding your passion. Take massive action and work hard as you can to get to your goals every day. Noticing your results and adapting your approach based on feedback and learning. Learn, that means listen, right? Building a growth mindset. Okay, you got to build a mindset around this. Building a growth mindset, believing that you can improve your skills and abilities with effort, a lot of effort, massive effort, right? Improving your emotional intelligence and manage your emotions effectively. You can't let your emotions get involved too much in this other than using your emotion to be passionate about what you're doing and passionate about being successful. Developing mental toughness and resilience to overcome challenges and setbacks. For every one person that's going to tell you, you can do it, Martin, there's going to be 1,000 people, negative people, pessimistic people that tell you you can't. You got to get these people out of your mind, out of your network. You got to be around the people that tell you, you can do it, Martin. You can do it, and we're here to help you. And the last thing is, and I think maybe, again, this thing is up there with oxygen. You got to have fun. You got to have fun along the way. Remember this. You got to enjoy the journey as much as you enjoy the destination. When I, drive to Florida, sometimes I'll go with my son or whatever. We hop in the car and we just go to Florida, just like that. I'll often say to him, he's so focused on getting to Florida and how much fun it will be in Florida. And I say, no, Daniel, you got to understand something. We're going to have as much fun driving to Florida as we are in Florida. It changes the whole journey. So have as much fun during the journey as you do getting to the, have as much fun enjoying the journey as much as you do getting at the destination. And by applying these principles consistently, and I mean consistently, every day, every minute of every day, you can increase your chances of being successful in life. Remember, success is not a destination, but a process of continuous growth and improvement. And the last expression that I'll leave with you, it's maybe up there with my top 3 most favorite expressions, is whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It's up to you. So good luck to everybody in being successful in whatever you do, in all your ventures in life. And if I can ever be of any help to anybody, I am just a phone call away. So thanks for your time this evening. I'll open it up at this point. You can open up the audio and any questions, comments, or discussion you'd like to have. We have another 25 minutes. I'm willing to extend that, subject to if anybody wishes to. Otherwise, we'll cut it off in 25 minutes. Unless there's no questions, then we can end the conversation now. So I'll open it up to the floor for anyone who wants to make any comments.
Well, thank you so much, Martin. And I have to thank you especially for your compliments to me. And I think like a trailblazers geezer on the call is like much more successful than me. He is like athlete. um, yeah. So, and do we like our audience have any questions for Martin? So, yes, please.
Sorry, my name is Dome. I really want to express a big thank you to Martin. Your speech is so inspirational and motivating. And I almost jot down all the words you mentioned, or the tips you shared. And thank you so much for really generously and kindly share all the tips to us. And personally, I really, I really get inspired. But I do have a question. Because personally, I'm not like a risk taker. And you mentioned that, of course, it's also, I understand it's extremely important. And then you mentioned something to learn to love the risks. I'm just wondering if there's anything you want to share by your experience, how to learn to embrace the risks. And then, because by nature, probably, I guess like many people hate risks, but how we can overcome that barrier.
Firstly, thank you for your compliment. And it is an excellent question. Overcoming risk is also part of overcoming fear. They're very, very connected. And the suggestion, that I can make to you, there's a few things that you can do. I'll give you a few little tricks, practical tricks that you could do. And that is, depending on what it is that you do at work or do for work, and if you work for somebody, what I would do is a couple things. So the first thing I would do is I would think about something like, as an example, supposing you're part of a charity. I'm sure everybody has, where they've got to sell tickets, or your children come home from school and they say something like, "Oh, mommy, I've got this raffle book and I've got to sell these tickets for $5 each," or something along those lines. You could take something as simple as just raffle tickets, or something you're doing at work where they say we're having a contest. Just find something that requires you to go out there and do what I would call an ask to sell something. And it doesn't matter how small it is or what it is. And of course, usually you might be a bit shy, a bit introverted, and this is a way of overcoming it. So what you do for yourself is you set yourself up in your mind and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out today, and I'm committing to myself, is I'm going to go up to 20 people and I'm going to ask them to buy a ticket. And in your head, in your mind, here's how you start out. I'm expecting to get 20 no's. In fact, I want to get 20 people to tell me no. That's what my goal is. My mission is, I want 20. I don't want anybody buying a ticket. I don't want anyone saying yes. So you start out sort of with the idea that you're not going to have any success today. And then what happens is you go out, you ask the first person, the second person, the third person, and you're not disappointed because you're expecting all no's. And finally, you get to that 7th person or the 19th person, and all of a sudden, one of them says yes. And you will be so shocked and so surprised, you'll start to laugh, you'll start to giggle, and you'll go, oh my God. And you'll get that feeling. And I can't explain the feeling to you because you need to feel that feeling. You'll get that feeling and say, oh my goodness, it wasn't that difficult. And boy, now that I sold that $5 raffle ticket, I feel so good. It's going to give you such a good feeling that what it's going to do is it's going to inspire you to go and do it again. And then might inspire you to go and do it with something a little bit bigger. And it becomes very contagious. Sales and taking risk becomes contagious. The biggest problem is what I told you at the very beginning of this evening's presentation. The first 2 words I said in this presentation were what? Get started. So what I would say to you is, get started. Find something, just find something, go with your children. I had a real interesting time last summer. I live I live on the lake, and it's a fairly rural community. And I was cycling around, coming back home. And I saw, when I was cycling back home, it was like a scene from 1980. I saw 3 young children. And again, being in a rural area, people feel, I guess parents feel it's a little safer up here for some reason. It was during the day. I saw 3 young children. I'm guessing they were about 5, 7, and 9, and they were selling lemonade. A lemonade stand. God, I hadn't seen that since I was probably 10 years old. And they were selling lemonade. And I just literally, I slammed my brakes on, and I just took a second look, and I could not believe it. And I think they were selling it for $1 each. So I just had to go over there and see what they were doing, and obviously encourage them based on my beliefs. I wanted to support them. So I slammed my brakes on, went over. And of course, the older one started right away to give me this rehearsed whole campaign thing about why her lemonade was hot out. Her lemonade was cold. It had ice, unlike other lemonade that they sell without ice, and how tasty it was, and how much, sugar they put inside, and it would help me cycle faster. She was terrific. So then I said, well, that's really good. I said, but I haven't heard from the other 2. And the other 2 didn't know they had to say anything, right? So I asked the second one, and of course they weren't rehearsed. And so the other one sort of, was very shy, but sort of said, yeah, the lemonade's really, really good. And then I said, what about you? She said, oh, the lemonade's tasty. I really like the lemonade. I said, well, how much lemonade do you think I should buy? And of course, they said, well, the first one, the little one said, well, you should buy a cup. And the middle one said, well, you could buy a cup or 2. And the third one says, well, we have a special on today. If you buy 3, it's for the price of 2. And I literally almost fell off my bike. And of course, what I eventually did, I was just so overly impressed, is I basically gave her $10, and I said, I'm buying each of you 3 cups and 1 for myself. And I took my 1 cup, drank it, and I drove on. And they were thrilled to death. I may have been their only sale during the day, but they had an incredibly valuable lesson. And it reminded me, in answering your question tonight, is you've got to get started. Do something very small. Volunteer somewhere where you have to do an ask of some kind. And when you do it, set yourself up for failure. Set yourself up to not succeed so that you're not disappointed. And then when you do succeed, you'll see it just gets contagious, and you'll go on from there. Another thing I'll share with you is another little thing that another speaker over the years told me, and it was also a wonderful way of getting started, is this speaker used to put 3 coins in their right pocket. Doesn't matter what the coins are. They used to put 3 pockets in the right coin. And you can use this for 2 things. If you want to make your day happier and you want to make your day more successful, and you can either use it to sell something or just to make the world a better place in which to live. And what they did was their mandate of those 3 coins was to transfer each coin over to their left pocket by the end of the day. How did they transfer those 3 coins? Well, in one exercise, the person had to pay a compliment to somebody in order to transfer their coin over to their left pocket. So by the end of the day, they had paid 3 compliments to 3 separate people. And I don't know if you know what it's like when you go up to somebody and you say to them, that dress you're wearing looks lovely, or that suit or that jacket looks lovely, or boy, you've got an incredible bike, or you know what, you're really smart. I thought about what you did this morning. That was really a smart thing to do. Can you imagine doing that? We just don't do that naturally. Some of us might, but most of us don't. But could you imagine forcing yourself to transfer 3 coins from your right pocket to your left pocket every day by having to pay 3 compliments? Well, you can use the same thing for the sales tactic, which is, if you have a product or raffle tickets of some kind, then you have to say to yourself, I have to approach 3 people today. I have to get those coins into my left pocket. I've got to approach 3 people today to get them to say no, and then be pleasantly surprised when one of them says yes. So those are just, I don't know if it helps you or not, but those are just some ideas of how to get started in regards to overcoming fear and overcoming risk.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing all the tips and the stories. Your passion is also contagious. Thank you.
My pleasure. Does anybody else have anything? You can, I don't know if we can unmute everybody. Let me just see here. Invite, I'm going to see if I can just.
Yeah, people ask questions. So while we're waiting, oh, is there anybody like have any questions there? I heard somebody. If no, like while we're waiting, Martin, I do have a question for you. Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. I'm just wondering. Okay. I'm just wondering if we have everyone muted. If we can just unmute everybody. I think you can control that from your end.
No, everybody has to unmute themselves.
Okay, even so everybody can unmute themselves.
Yeah. So, you talked about like one thing for success to focus, be extreme, right? So you believe in yourself so much. Yeah. But the other thing is you need to embrace change. Sometimes at some point you would be confused. So like you would think, oh, whether should I continue like to be that extremist,
right?
Or I need to have a change.
Right.
So do you have any moments in your business life that you struggle between the two, and what did you do?
Absolutely. And another great question. When I finished, the answer is different from when I first started my career to when I finished my career. When I finished my career, I had my latest mentor taught me a lesson that the expression that he used to use was, your first loss is your best loss. And what they used to do by practice was every year, his company used to do one very innovative or something that was revolutionary, disruptive, or innovative. They did one thing every year, and they tried as hard as they could to be as best at it as they could. If it succeeded, they continued, and if it failed, they dropped it. And then they would try another thing the following year. So that at the extreme level, when you can afford to be in a position to do that, the practice of your first loss is your best loss is a pretty good practice. In the beginning days, when I came across certain things, and believe me, I can tell you I had way more failures than successes. We needed in the beginning days to learn how it was best to record conferences at all of these convention centers and hotels. So we were constantly reinventing ourselves as to what was the best way. When digital came along, we had to figure that out. We had to figure out whether we use mixers, whether we wire all the rooms, whether we try and get feeds from all the amplifiers in the hotels. We went through a lot of iterations of success. And to be honest with you, at the end of the day, I'm not sure that we ever discovered that there was one right way. We discovered there was a few right ways. So I would say this to you, that I think, the question becomes, I think your question really becomes is, when do you reach the point where you've just kind of beaten something to death, where, you've really put your best foot forward, you've been passionate about it, you've done whatever you possibly can, and you've reached that point where you're ready to quit and you're ready to give up and you're ready to sort of say it's not working. I would say to you this, I think when you feel that you've exhausted every possibility, you've done everything that you can think of, you can't think of anything else, and even at that point, you've gone to your mentors, you've picked up that phone and said, I need help. What do you think? I've reached this wall. I can't get beyond. And you've called all of the people that you can. You've tried every which way you can, and it just doesn't seem any way out. I think you can reach a point where you sit there and say, okay, this isn't going to work. I need to, reinvent myself. I need to look at doing something else, maybe something different. What are my other passions? What are my other expertise? And you need to look at a change at that point. And I will tell you this, that as much as you can fail within your current passion, you can also fail with that passion, which means you may have to go through. My son said the other day, he went into his, he became a lawyer. He didn't like it, so he started a business with a partner. Unfortunately, they have become very successful in a few short years. And he often shares his trials and tribulations with me, and his tears, how tough it is, how he's working 24 hours a day, doesn't know if he should keep going. He shares that with me. And I kind of, in the back of my mind, laugh. And I don't want to say to him, hey, Daniel, you may have to go through 25 businesses before you find the right one, because it does take a lot of trial and error. And it's not just within the business, but with the business itself. So in answer to your question, yeah, you can reach the point where it just doesn't make sense anymore. But what I would encourage you is, you can't just throw up your hands every time something goes wrong. You can't throw up your hands and feel helpless because you're having a bad day. You really need to stick with it as much as you can. Focus. Don't try and go in 10 directions. Focus on the direction you're going in. Try and figure out. But when you can't, it's time to declare failure and move on. So I don't know if that helps you or not, Young, in terms of an answer, but that's kind of the way I approach things. I can tell you that there was not one. I can tell you there was literally, in fact, I can't even keep track of the number of times that we failed, and the number of times I was in tears, and the number of times I wanted to quit. They were astronomical, exponential times. But I just kept at it. And when I felt really, really bad, that's when I picked up the phone and I would phone my mentors. I even picked up the phone once and phoned a competitor of mine. And I said to him, how do you do it? Like, I'm at the point where I'm now phoning you. You're my competition. I'm phoning you to help me. And the funny thing was that phone call became one of the most important phone calls I ever made in my life, because 15 to 20 years later, that individual who helped me stay in a competitive business to him, I was the guy who ended up buying his business from him when he retired. And it was because he helped me, it came full circle to him, that I actually ended up being the acquirer of his business and looking after his family so that he unfortunately had brain cancer at the time, and he could pass away peacefully knowing his family was looked after because I was able to buy his business. So,
that's amazing. So you phoned him, and in like 15, 20 years later, you bought his company.
No. What happened 20 years later? 15, 20 years. So what happened was, way back in, I guess it was the early 80s, I was having a bit of a meltdown. Technology was starting to change. Actually late 80s. And when digital was coming on board, I was very worried about it. And I called him. I said, well, what do you do about this? And he spent like 2 hours on the phone with me and encouraged me to stay in the business. And that was in, let's say, 1989, something like, trying to think exactly when, but it doesn't really matter. It was somewhere around, let's say, 1990, something like that. And in 2000, something like that, maybe 10 years later, that's when he got ill. And he called me 10 years later and said to me, he said, you know what? I'm ill. I want to sell my business so that my kids have first of all, have someone to work for and have some money in the bank. And he said, I'm only making one phone call, and it's to you. Can we work something out? And we did. We worked it out in like less than a week. I bought his business, and he died a couple of years later.
Wow. Like, so I got it like too good.
Yeah, his name was Bill Hollingsworth, and his company name was called ACTS, ACTS. And by the way, not only that, so it ended up being great for him. And because we were able to do the acquisition at that point, I ended up buying another 4 companies within 2 years the same way, because he gave me the template. So you talk about give and take, and you talk about being a good person and how things come back to reward you. It worked for both of us.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I heard Wendy raised her hand. Wendy?
Hi, Marty.
Hi, Wendy.
Thanks for all the wonderful, great conversation, and lots of ideas are flying in my head. I have a question. So, how generous is too generous?
Well, it's again another great question. I think my knee-jerk reaction to that was, I'm not sure there is such a thing as being over generous. That's my knee-jerk reaction. There are some great people in this world that earn a lot of money and give back almost all of it. I could start give you a list of people, but I think you know who they are, and probably it's not worth it necessarily to go through them all. But the greatest people that I look up to are the ones that earn literally tens of millions, billions of dollars, and give most of it back. Those are my heroes. Those are my mentors. The other thing, Wendy, to tell you that if you want to do some very interesting reading, and if you go back and do some research on the internet and you look up the reason that the most successful people, ask them the question as to the 10 reasons that they went into business, or the 10 reasons that they wanted to be successful. Interestingly enough, in almost all cases, in almost every single case of the top money earners in the world, you ask them the 10 top reasons why they wanted to be successful. Not one of those 10 reasons is money. Not one. And it'll start with, you look at a guy like Bill Gates, and it'll start with him saying, I wanted to do this. My mission was to build this computer and this desktop that could, process the business practice. And his vision was to have a desktop on every single desk in every office in the world. That was his mission. And his vision was to do all of this. And part of his visions was then to be able to use the benefit of having all of this so that we could communicate better as a community, that we could, that the money could go, the money that was earned from it, much of it could go towards helping society. That was the kind of thing that his vision and his mission stated. Not one thing said, I want to make a lot of money. And you'd be very surprised that the most successful people in the world, I would say, are like in terms of your question, are there's no bounds to the generosity, no bounds at all. You look at I probably not the best example, but you look at an Elon Musk. At one point, a couple of years ago, I don't know if you know too much about his story, but a couple of years ago, Elon owned he owned about 8 to 10 significantly sized homes, and he sold them all, and he moved into a tiny home. Same type of tiny home that we're trying to build for people who are affected by homelessness today. And I'm not sure if he still lives in one or not, but here's a guy who's the richest man in the world, moved into a tiny home. And even if he lived there a day, it's a statement. It's a statement. This is a guy that could live in any home, anywhere in the world. He moved into a tiny home. So does that make him a great person? I don't know. He's definitely, he's definitely not normal. He's definitely way out there. He does some crazy stuff. But there's a really good example. As I went through my presentation tonight, it pretty much describes who he is. And there is a bit of craziness to it, right? He's not the normal guy, right? And some people are very turned off by that, but other people just embrace it and say, this is a guy who absolutely believes that before he dies, that the earth will expand and have community on Mars and the moon. He's completely convinced of it. And we all sit here today and we laugh, but maybe we won't be laughing in 10 years from now. I don't know. We'll find out. Stay tuned.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help at all, Wendy, or were you looking for a different answer?
A little bit different answer, but maybe I can connect with you offline.
That, or feel free to rephrase it maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking more of in a work aspect is how generous is being too generous. With like a lot of the accommodations being met, except for knocking on the person's front door. Right.
So in other words, when you're in let's say you're, as an example, you were employed in a certain circumstance, even if you're working as a volunteer, but you feel a little bit that they're taking advantage of your kindness and your goodwill, and you're giving, you're basically being accommodated. Let's say you're being paid for 8 hours and you're working 12 or 14 hours, and there really isn't a lot of recognition, and you feel like you're giving everything and not getting much back. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there is a good case in point to discuss where, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people on the receiving end of people who are generous is not knowing how to recognize individuals. This is very, very typical in charities, where so many volunteers give so much of their time, and then the organizers or the executive of those committees don't give the appropriate recognition. Fortunately enough, you and I and others are in the type of organizations that do, but there are many organizations that simply don't, and there's many employers that don't as well, and they just don't understand the value of recognition. Often that person who's working the 12 hours isn't necessarily looking for more money. They're not necessarily looking to be in the limelight, but all they're looking for is just some kindness and some recognition. Just somebody to walk over and say, hey, thanks. I know that you did that extra 3 hours for me last night, and I just want to say thank you. And I think, I think generosity goes as far to some degree as possibly as the recognition that you get back. And I think when someone is being overly generous and doesn't get recognition, it has an equal and opposite effect. In fact, it pushes that person more and more away, where even the 8 hours they're doing, they feel bad about, because there is really no appreciation. And I think if you're in an environment where you're not being appreciated, where you feel that you are being taken advantage of, my personal opinion is I would find a new environment. I don't know, that's pretty harsh, but to be honest with you, I think life is too short, and I don't want to work with negative people. I don't want to be around pessimistic people. I don't want to be around people that don't appreciate me. And if I was in that environment, I don't think I'd look at it and say, gee, I'm going to pull back on my generosity. I'd say, I'm a generous person and I want to give my extra. It's just not to this person. I'll end up giving it somewhere else. And that's only if you're in the comfortable position that you feel you can do that. Then that falls into the category of risk. Now you have to take the risk of maybe leaving an environment or leaving a job to try and find another one. So it's all connected, right? Everything's connected. Are you willing to take the risk to go somewhere else, to be in an environment where being overly generous is a good thing because you're being recognized for it either financially or through some form of recognition? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
And does it answer your question, more importantly?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Great. Anybody else have a question for Martin? Okay, then I have a question, Martin.
Okay.
So how to be persuasive? So last year you told us a secret, like this binary, like kind of like binary options you offer to people, right? You give them two choices, so people will probably choose one that you would like them to choose. Right. Other than that, like how to be persuasive, do you have other tricks or any stories?
Well, again, another great question. And for those of you who weren't on the last session, the two choices are simply this, is that when you ask somebody a question, you're going to get a yes or no answer. When you give someone two options, you take away the yes or no. In other words, you're assuming the answer is yes. It's just, do you want A or B? So it's a way of getting an answer to the question that you want them to answer, as opposed to giving them a yes or no option. And a good example of that would be if I was to say to Wendy, I'd say, hey, Wendy, do you want to go for lunch tomorrow? So if I asked Wendy to go to lunch, Wendy could say yes, or she could say no. If I said to Wendy, so I have a 50-50 chance, but if I said to Wendy, hey, Wendy, I know you got to eat tomorrow. I'm going to come by your place and I'm going to take you for lunch. The only question I ask you is, do you want to go for Thai food or do you want Chinese? So I'm not asking her if she wants to go for lunch. I'm telling her we're going for lunch. It's just the only choice that she can choose is Thai or Chinese. So it's a way of getting what you want, not giving them an option, but giving them only an option to say yes by making one or two choices. If I give Wendy more than that and say, hey, Wendy, I'm going to send you a list of 57 restaurants, you choose where we go, I may never hear back from Wendy because she'll be spending a week trying to figure out which restaurant to go to. So it's always about giving somebody two choices. Now, in answer to your question, Young, now I've explained what two choices are. There's many, many, many different ways of being persuasive, and it's both an art and a science. And again, it's almost a separate session, but I'll just give you one or two. One of the things about being persuasive, it's almost synonymous with the word passion, and people will read into passion all the time. So you've got to learn how to be passionate about what it is that you are striving to sell to somebody or something that you're trying to get someone to do. And the way in which you do that is never by asking on them if they want to do it, but rather describing to them what they'll feel like when they do it. This is a real art of persuasion. And that is, I'll give you like as an example, if I wanted to go cycling, okay, with Wendy tomorrow, or with Young, or Giza for that matter. If I want to go cycling tomorrow, and they would say, well, it's going to be cold outside, it's a little bit rainy. Here's what I would say. I wouldn't phone up Giza and say, hey, Giza, do you want to go cycling tomorrow? I would phone up Giza, hey, Giza, I've got this great idea. It's a wonderful idea. I said, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go cycling tomorrow. Can you imagine if, I know it'll be a little cold when we first get out there, but can you imagine what it's going to feel like once we get warmed up and we're really going fast? And you remember what it's like when we're pushing that bike so hard and we're going so fast and the wind is like flowing our hair back and we're listening to music and then we're going to stop. We're going to have lunch. And you know what? We're going to go to the favorite place we always go to. And then when we get through our ride, we're going to go home. And you know that feeling that you have when you finished a ride, how good you feel that you've gone out, you've exercised, and how great it's been to go and cycle. And, we're both going to sit there and say to ourselves, oh my God, thank goodness we didn't stay home. Thank goodness we went cycling. You know that feeling, right? You say, yeah, I know that feeling. I'm going to sell what it's going to feel like to experience whatever it is I'm trying to sell. I'm not going to sell going to the place. I'm not going to sell that we can be on time. I'm not going to sell anything about it. I'm not going to ask the questions. I'm not even going to do a two-step process. I'm simply going to describe what it's going to feel like after the person. It's just like a car. You've got to describe the feeling of, can you imagine what it'd be like to own that car? Can you just imagine what you're going to feel like when you take that car home and drive it up and show your spouse or show your kids? Can you imagine what you'll feel like? Can you imagine, how good you're going to feel every time you get in that car and press that pedal and you've made that decision? That's the kind of thing. So that's the art of persuasion. Does that help at all?
Wow.
I heard a wow.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So describe. So basically taking the experience, whatever it is, and it could be with kids. I mean, it could be that, if your kid is reluctant to go to the prom, or if your kid is reluctant to go to school, reminding them not of necessarily what their school's going to be, but reminding them of, hey, when you finish school and you meet up with Susie and the two of you go to the playground and that you do this. Like taking the good experience feeling and reminding them of that and saying what they're going to feel like after they experience that, how good they're going to feel about exercise. And it's the same thing with getting people to exercise. I mean, I use it all the time with people that I'm trying to encourage to exercise. I'll say to them, can you imagine what, or I've been a person who's fought weight all my life. So I help other people sometimes if they confide in me and they say, hey, can you help me? I'm really trying to lose weight. I could use your motivation and encouragement. And I'll say to them. And so we're out and whatever. They look at me and say, oh, let's go for an ice cream. And I'll say, you know what? Instead of that, why don't we do this? Let's go for a cycle. And I said, can you imagine what we're going to feel like if we skip the ice cream, we go cycling, have that great experience, and instead we go for a tea instead of the ice cream, and we come back and we're sitting here at 7 o'clock tonight. We're both going to feel so great that we skipped the ice cream, went for a cycle instead, and had that ride. And wouldn't that be a way better decision? That's how you be persuasive, is you sell the experience and what it's going to feel like afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And this idea occurred to me, like in your business, do you remember a time that you try to sell something or try to persuade somebody and you failed very hard, but at last you did it?
Where I failed persuading them?
Not necessarily failed, but maybe very hard, but at last you succeeded. And
yeah, and that's called tenacity.
What is that? Tenacity.
It's just not taking no for an answer. And I would say this to you. Interestingly enough, my business partner is very much like that. He has a lot of tenacity, and that just means just not accepting no as an answer. That's a tough thing, Yang. That's a really, really tough thing. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of passion. And you've got to really put yourself in the mindset. But you look up the word tenacity. It's just the art of not taking no for an answer. And I think tenacity is more a part of personality. But again, I could do a whole session on personality versus behavior, a really good session on personality versus behavior, but that would take like another hour or two. So it's training yourself through behavior to get a result. And if your personality isn't one that has tenacity, and most of us don't, the question then would become is, well, how do you get this tenacity? How do you make yourself a person that won't take no for an answer? And there's a way to do it through behavior. That's the good news. The bad news is very few succeed. So again, it's back to the elephant in the circus tent, but it's back to the fly in the shoebox. Is, do you want to be the one elephant or the one fly that can be, that can learn tenacity and learn not to, take no for an answer? And you can do it, and you can be successful, but you often will have to beat up your you have to successfully know how to beat up your personality to do it, because your personality doesn't necessarily allow you to do it naturally. So you have to do it unnaturally and get a good enough result, okay, that the result is so great that it allows you to stick with that behavior and fight against your personality. That all sounds a little complicated, but because it's a whole session. But yeah, that you can do it, but and it's a very, very tough thing to do. And I've been good at it and I've been bad at it. There's times where I will, after getting a no, just quit and say, okay, I've had enough. I'm tired. My energy's gone. And there's times where I've said, no, I said, I'm going to use my behavior. I'm going to fight my personality. I'm not taking no for an answer. And yeah, there's examples. The best example, did you want an example as well when that happened?
Yes, that would be your story. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it is a story. It's a good one. And actually, it's a very close friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, a woman by the name of Paulette Vanette. And she was the executive director of something called the Canadian Society of Association Executives. And back in roughly, I want to say around 1980, something like that, companies like ourselves, our biggest client that we could get was the Canadian Society of Association Executives, because that society was actually the association of associations. So they represented all of the associations in Canada. And it meant if I could get that association, the chances of me getting all of the other associations in Canada was very great. There was a guy out of Ottawa by the name of Bob Black. He was called Conference Tape. I can't believe I remember this. But anyways, it was called Conference Tape out of Ottawa. and actually a good guy. But Bob was my very direct competitor at that time in Canada. And Bob Black had secured the account for Canadian Society Association Executives since 1975, had it for about 3 years. So I went to visit Paulette, who was then the executive director in 1978, roughly, of CSAE. And I went to see her, and I went to see her once. I called her a second time. I called her a third time, went to see her a second time, called her a fourth time, fifth time. I kept calling. I kept going to see her. She kept agreeing to see me. And she finally said to me, she said, look, we have a contract with Bob Black out of Ottawa. And I finally, in her office, I actually pounded my fist on the desk and I said, Paulette, you've got to give me a chance. It's not fair that CSAE only allows Bob Black a chance. You need to give me a chance. And she was silent. And she said, Martin, I have another meeting right now, but let me digest and I'll get back to you. She phoned me a week later. She said, I spoke with the board, and we've decided, because the conference is in Toronto this year and you're in Toronto and Bob's in Ottawa, we're going to give you the chance. And that was the beginning of another, I guess that was 1978. The company which I sold to is still to this day doing their conference in 2023. We've had the contract for whatever that is, 40, 45 years. And Paulette and I turned out to end up being best friends, and still are. And I communicate with her still to this day, even though we're both retired, every single day of the week. We text each other. So that's a story of tenacity. That's a story of persistence. That's a story of persuasion. That's a story of risk, because she could have literally thrown me out, and then every other association that would call her would have said, this guy's nuts, don't deal with him, right? So I took a real risk at getting that persuasive with her. So that's an example of a time which I was younger, I had more energy, and I had, again, was willing to take more risk, I guess, back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there must be something in your personality. So you persuaded her and you made friends with her, and also your competitor, like you called him, right? And 10, 15 years later, you bought his company. So yeah, there must be something in your personality or the way you communicate with people.
There is, and it's a session called Behavior versus Personality, and we'll
do that session later.
Okay, yeah, it's a bit of a longer discussion than I could probably, I don't want to be unfair to people who are sort of planning on being off the call at 9 o'clock. It's a longer conversation, but it is something that's not necessarily as natural to me as it is to my business partner. My business partner, it comes from his personality. Me, it comes from my behavior. I have to produce behavior that I'm not comfortable with, but because I get such amazing results from it and reward from it, that I'm able to win over my personality. So I override my personality to do it. But you're quite right, Young. It is definitely, it's definitely either comes from personality because it's natural, or behavior because the rewards are so great that you can do it. That's the answer.
Okay. We have next sessions theme now.
We'll talk.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from anybody else? I hope everyone can unmute, because I just see all these people that are muted right now. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. So yeah, everybody.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So do you think it's a good idea to have a good friends as business partner? Do you think it's going to make the situation a bit more complicated?
Oh, what a loaded question. We should end the session right now and I not answer that one. Boy, it's a business partnership is, and I'll just say it's like a marriage. Sometimes, someone's your best friend, and you either go into business with them or you get married to them, and it ends up being a disaster. And sometimes it ends up being an incredible success. I think that's a really, really, really tough answer. And I think it really depends on the two people. I will say this. This is a bit of a roundabout way of answering the question. I'll try to come back and answer it directly, but I'm going to choose to deviate a bit right now to say this. It's always best to pick a partner that has very different skill sets than you, because one of the things about choosing a partner in business, and this is business, not personal. One of the things about choosing a partner in business, if you choose a partner who's exactly like you, identical to you, then if you go back to simple mathematics, 1 + 1 can only equal 2. Okay. So choose a partner exactly like you. 1 + 1 can only equal 2. However, if you choose a partner that's completely different from you, like wildly different from you, there is a possibility that 1 + 1 can equal 3. And that's exactly what happened in my case. My partner was as different from me as day and night. Interestingly enough, now we're 20 odd years later, we've become a lot more like each other. But he's picked up some of my better traits. I picked up some of his good traits. We've learned from each other. But you're often better off when you're starting out is pick somebody who is very different from you, has a very different skill sets, because if they're very good at math and accounting and finance, and let's say you're very good at sales and administration, it's a winning team, because you can kind of bring all the good stuff. You can focus on sales and administration. They can focus on finance and accounting, and you can end up having the best of all worlds, right? You can divide, what we say, you can divide and conquer. So in terms of skill sets, very different. In terms of being best friends and going into businesses, I've seen 2 outcomes from it, candidly. The only 2 outcomes. I've never seen anything in the middle. When you're best friends, you go into business, it's either a complete disaster or a complete success. And I don't know how else to answer that. It's a huge risk, because you're going to change the relationship to either make it very better or very much worse. And unfortunately, I've seen some great friends that don't talk to each other today as a result of going into business together. I've also seen great friends who've gone into business together, whose families now, their entire families they go on vacation everywhere together. They travel every single vacation, they travel together. I've seen it both ways. So I don't know that there's a conclusive answer to that one. I'm a bit stumped on that, other than to tell you what I've seen, and also tell you in terms of skill sets what to choose.
That's a great suggestion. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Now, I noticed also, Young, I'm just going to let you know, I noticed there's 2 hands up.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just don't know whose they are. And I see.
I heard Eleanor and Casey. Do you see other people? Because I can only hear it.
Sorry, I see Kathy Yee.
I know Eleanor raised her hand first.
Okay.
Or yeah, I hope I'm not mistaken. But Eleanor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin. It's very, very, how to say, I compare 2 seminars because of COVID, we have so many Zoom meeting, and compare with the other, I finally choose you. Speech is very, very interesting, and very, I really learn a lot. My question is, because I a little bit late to online, so I just search. So my question is, why don't you? It's difficult to search you. For YouTube. It's 11 months ago. It's the same seminar. I think Yang also organized the dialogue with you. It's the only one videos I can choose. I certainly searched online, and LinkedIn, I cannot search your profile. So my question is, why don't you promote yourself? Because nowadays so many people promote. I just want everybody, really benefit from your speech. It's really, I learned a lot from your speech. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your very, very kind words. It's really appreciated, and it's comments like that just as I was talking with Wendy earlier, it's just comments like that make this completely worthwhile. If I've done just one thing for one person tonight, it's enough. And the fact that we've shared together, and a lot of us have benefited from this session, I'm overwhelmed with appreciation for everyone that's on the call. So in answer to your question, why I don't self-promote. And it's a great question. I do get asked on occasion, and I'll explain to you the reason why. When first of all, I did retire. I sold the company in 2011, retired in 2013. At that time, my sole purpose was to be very, very low profile and just try and give back very quietly to companies that were in their early stages, also to help my own children, and just to do it in very much by trying as best I can to stay in the background. So one of the commitments I made to myself was, not to promote myself, not to commit to any to much other than just trying to help the people who I really wanted to help. So I do get a number of calls every year from either entrepreneurs that are young or companies that are in their early stages that are looking for help. And I spend time with them generally on the phone to try and get to understand them, get to understand who they are, what their motives are, what their mission is, what their vision is, what their eventual goals are. Are they charitable people? Are they giving people? Are they going to take advantage of my generosity, just like Wendy was referring to earlier? And eventually I end up with knowing exactly who I want to work with. And what I do very quietly in the background is I will become what's called an advisor or a mentor to that company. I have regular meetings with them. We set up what's called a senior management team. And usually it's the CEO, the CFO, the chief operating officer, that type of person, myself, and sometimes my partner if he's involved in that business. And 3 or 4 of us will sit on a call and we'll talk about, we'll do what's called a SWOT analysis, which is examining the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to their company. We'll talk about the KPIs, which are the key performance indicators of their companies. And we'll give them, an hour or 2 hours, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month. Sometimes it could be as much as 3 or 4 hours a week. And I'll just spend time with them, helping them become successful, simply because it's a way for me to give back, to keep my mind involved. And I do this to some degree with companies that my kids are involved with. So indirectly, I'm helping them as well. And it also opens up opportunities down the road for my own. There's a selfishness to it too, because it does open up opportunities for my children to be introduced to them and them to introduce to my children, and just really set up a network opportunity for everybody. And I just enjoy being involved. I enjoy giving back. And I don't want to do what I do as a living. I used to do some speaking at conferences, actually quite a bit of speaking at conferences. I don't want to go back and become a speaker for a conference. I don't want to have an obligation to run a company, but rather I'd rather be a mentor. I'd rather be, and I only want to mentor and be an advisor to the companies that I choose to be, that I want to be. And this way it allows me to kind of spend what time I want with who I want. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, is make sure when you choose your network, you choose optimistic, not pessimistic people. Choose what you consider, by your definition, successful people. Florence Nightingale could have, died penniless, right? But she was a very, very, very successful person and helped an immense number of people. But she was very poor, all her life. So the fact of the matter is that you can be very poor, you can be very rich, it doesn't matter. You can still be very successful. I know people who literally live just above the poverty line, who have been at times affected by homelessness, and still continue to live just above the poverty line. But they are the most successful people I know, because what they do is they spend their life helping other people who are below the poverty line, trying to get them at least up over the poverty line. So to me, they're my heroes. And I look at just spending time with people like that just in a way of giving back. Because fortunately, I'm in a position where I've made enough. I'm not a billionaire, but I've made enough to be comfortable, and I've made enough now to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And this is the reason I go fairly low key in terms of promoting myself. I hope it's a long-winded way to answer it, but that's the full story.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Martin. I feel I'm so lucky to have you as East-West Learning Connections advisor and member. I feel like after your explanation, I feel we're extremely lucky.
The only lucky person, Young, is me.
Oh.
So I'm lucky to have you guys, and because you give me life, you give me breath, you give me hope you give me hope in humanity, and that there's more people like you and more organizations like you that are doing such good things for other good people. And I know that all of the people on this call tonight, we were at 19. I think we're still holding on to 15 people at this late hour. And I know that these 15 people on this call, 14 of them myself, will eventually end up giving back, and they'll give back to community. They'll give back to society. And if that's a bit of my legacy, then I'm very, very happy and very proud, and I'm honored to be part of the group. Who else do we have? Well, Wendy's hand is still up, but I'm not sure. I think
Wendy didn't put down her hand. Is that so, Wendy?
Let me see if there's anyone else here. Okay. So Wendy may just not have put hers down by now, but she put hers down now. Okay.
All right.
So
it's way past 9 o'clock. Thank you so much, Martin. I'm really touched. You are so ready to give to people. Thank you.
My complete pleasure. It's easy when it's the type of individuals who themselves give so much to. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. All right. So everybody, thanks for coming. To enjoy this wonderful presentation by Martin. We'll invite him back. Martin, we'll invite you back.
Thank you, Young. And I hope everybody enjoyed the presentation as much as I enjoyed my time with you and giving the presentation tonight.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a good night.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Yang. Have a good night.